everyone, and we're live. You're tuning to Cosmic Children. I'm your host, Kevin, and today I have a very interesting guest in the studio with me. So I was introduced to her by my partner, and I think she was clamoring for the longest time that I should get her on the podcast, and I'm glad that we finally found time to do this. So Marylyn, could you please introduce yourself to those who might not know who you are?
Hi, I'm Marylyn Tan. I am a writer, artist, famous pervert, linguistics major, and proud filthy lesbian.
Okay. In one of your previous podcast interviews, you described yourself as a degenerate poet. So I would like to start there. Could you please describe or even explain why the degeneracy?
I also don't remember. I think it has to do with the idea that I deal often with obscenity, with filth, with the vulgar and the profane, and degenerate, of course, stemming from the idea that there is a legitimate poetry, right? There is a legitimate literary canon in which we are all supposed to aspire to, like being a real writer or a real artist. And I think a lot of that has to do with respectability as well, which is the other big thing that I talk about in my work, right? Because as queers or as people who practice alternative religions or imaginations of being, this is not often accessible to us, right? It's not something that we should have to mold ourselves to fit, right? So I think by kicking down that door or removing that standard, which often is very unfairly applied to women as well, right? It kind of serves that purpose, like you are actively making space for the filthy bastards in your life.
Is that a conscious decision to that you are geared towards that, or was it more like a subconscious thing?
I think it was definitely when I first started out in, performing poetry, and I did that because, I wanted a captive audience to like listen to my poems, right? So you can leave the room, but very often people are nice and they'll just stay. I realized that there was a lot of this sense that people gravitated towards a certain aesthetics and a certain norm, a certain way of signaling, I'm progressive, but I also tick all the right boxes. I appeal to the audience in a very particular way, and I don't know if this is specific to the Singaporean scene or it happens all over the world. But I get very bored. So when I get bored, I tend to get destructive. And when I get destructive,
okay.
You tend to want to sort of rip apart those conventions. And that's where, the whole let's see how far we can push this goes. Because every time I thought this is the day I'm gonna get banned, or this is the day I'm gonna get, stopped or, blacklisted for doing things. And I'm sure I have, right? It didn't happen, and people seem to love it, right? Yep. People are always like, oh wow, why don't you talk more about this horrible thing? And I'm just like, wow, okay, sure. Then why isn't anyone else doing it, And I think it just kind of stemmed from there. Why reproduce something that anybody else can reproduce?
Would you be able to share a little bit as to what the traits of these performances might be? What is the timeline we're looking at? Is it in the early 2010s? Or what are we looking at?
I think I started in late 2013. That was the first time. And before that, I was already writing poetry, but very much for myself because I was kind of still in school at the time, right? So, this little poly kid, fresh out of poly or whatever, just kind of seeking artistic community. And then, as you hear other people perform and as you see what gets responded to and rewarded, and as you see what doesn't, you kind of, whether you like it or not, develop a very fine-tuned sense of okay, this is how to appeal to an audience that is, this demographic. Some people are good at that, some people are not. And I think that it was a very quick trajectory, right? Because then in 2014 I performed a lot. I got invited to do shows with people, and I think one thing you can say about the the spoken word community in Singapore is it's very welcoming of new voices, right? Because it's easy. It's got a very low barrier to entry. You just go in, you go to an open mic, and whether or not these people like it, maybe they're a bit drunk or whatever, they just sit there. They're just like, woo, yeah, you did well. But you don't actually know if you did well, right? So I think that's why a lot of people start there, right? It's quite comforting, right? To have a bunch of I guess artists or writers do that for you. And I think as I spent time there, I noticed that there was quite a huge queer population also in the spoken word poetry scene. And but I noticed that they weren't really talking about any of the things that I enjoyed in queer literature, right? Because if you think about queerness in lit, you think about the sex act, you think about sexuality. It's obviously linked to desire, to pleasure, to all those things. And of course, you know, you have your typical feminist like, yeah, I masturbate, I love, I don't know what women like, I guess. I like walking on the train and I don't like getting my titties stared at, but only, you know, in an empowering way, that kind of thing, you know. So that's fine, blah blah blah. The discourse gets it only goes so far, right, if you're not talking about it from an intrinsically queer perspective. And I think that even though I met a lot of lesbians or queer women in the scene, it wasn't something that I found reflected. I didn't feel like my own perversities or like inclinations towards the ugly or the hard-hitting were, I guess, reflected, right? So then it comes to me like, oh, how do I then bring this across, you know, like how do I put my experiences across in a way that's also relatable to people as much as you want to pander to an audience, but also authentic, right? So that line between being very glib and very authentic, that's, I think, where a lot of us struggle.
Interesting. I would like to take a little tangent. I would like to ask for your definition of the word queerness, because the concept it is pretty foreign to me. So I would like to know how you would describe it, and if that description has changed since you started in 2013 to right now, it's the year 2021.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kevin wants to get to know queerness a bit better.
Yeah, of course.
I think it's always been very fluid for me. I don't think that, okay, because I used to identify as bisexual, right? So I would just very happily tell everybody I'm bisexual. And then I feel like I got more and more gay as the years progressed. And I don't know if it's because I felt delegitimized as a bisexual person. And, you know, because people are always like, oh, well, if you're bi, it's kind of like a cop-out. And I did write poems about this. I'm like, oh, I'm not a real gay. I'm just, you know, gay light, right?
Okay.
And, you know, like the 40-day trial of being gay. And I think it got to a point where I realized like I genuinely did not enjoy dating men, or I genuinely did not enjoy like dating most cishet men. And I think like that willingness to admit that to myself kind of came like at a time where I was also performing, so it kind of made its way into my identity, right? But for me, I think it's hard because I definitely feel that there are some people, this is going to be very problematic, but there are some people who, you know, they're like, oh, well, I'm bisexual, I'm part of the gay or the queer community, but their involvement in community just goes as far as that. Just, you know, oh, I'm bisexual, I may be attracted to women, I've maybe slept with one, or maybe I haven't. It doesn't matter, right? What matters to me is like, what does community mean? So not really queer, but what does, you know, like you being a part of queerness mean to you and to us, right? Because you can't, I mean, sure, you know, you can identify as whatever the hell you want, like in your bedroom, it doesn't matter. I can identify as Doraemon, it's fine. But it's it's not going to mean anything to anyone if you don't act on it, right? And I think that that's why I found myself in a lot of queer spaces when I was actively trying to reclaim being queer, which is weird because I dated a cishet man for 2.5 years, right? And then when I got out of it, I was like, okay, this is my time to be gay again. Because like, you know, before that I was dating women or you know, like trans men or what have you. So it was kind of my first and last time dating a cishet man for any amount of time. And I felt like I had to prove to myself again that I was gay. I mean, obviously, like not every queer person needs to do that for themselves, right? But it was this weird, it sits between the idea of the personal and the political, right? Like, are you queer enough to be able to call yourself that, to be able to draw on that community? And as any bisexual will tell you, sometimes they just, you know, just poof, and like people forget about them, like, or they're not counted, right? If you're like, okay, tell me like who the queer people are in your group, it's going to be very seldom that I think bisexuals come to mind in a lot of circles. Yeah, I don't know if that's your experience as well.
I unfortunately have little to no experience because
Kevin has no gay friends, huh?
part and parcel because I'm a total recluse.
Oh no! Yeah. We must take you to a party. Just kidding. We got party.
Yeah, we got party now. Wink, wink. So you mentioned the word community with queer community. So I'm just curious to know your experience with that because what was it like? Could you paint a picture or like tell of some of your experiences with it?
I mean, if you start with community, I think usually you start with Pink Dot, but my first, I think, experience or my first sort of baby step into queer community was actually volunteering at Ugachaga. So Ugachaga is this non-profit sort of like mental health and community organization for, you know, LGBTQ individuals. And what they do is they run a hotline, right? So and they do paracounseling for people who kind of just need a listening ear. And because I was doing a psychology diploma at the time, so I was like, okay, perfect, you know, I can like help all these troubled gays, being a troubled gay myself. So it kind of became this thing where I would meet a lot of older queer people and, you know, like listening to them counsel people, or I mean even going through the training of like, okay, these are the issues that people have in the gay community, these are issues that plague, for example, trans women specifically, or these are the issues that plague bisexuals specifically. It kind of was like a crash course into Singaporean queerness, right? And it was so fascinating because you would sit around in this room full of, you know, like would-be paracounselors, and you know, this trainer would come in, like different trainers on different weeks would come in, and then they would talk to you about their own experiences being counselors and or just, you know, being queer people. And I think back then it was so funny because like there was this conversation we were having about sex toy custody and like who should get to keep a sex toy after a breakup. And it was just amazing because this older lesbian was just like, just get a new dildo, just buy a new cock, guys, just buy. I was like,
it does make sense.
Yes. Then like me thinking in the back of my mind, like, I don't have money to buy a new one. You buy
more
for
practical
me.
reasons.
Yeah. So I think seeing people interact like that, even right, listening to those conversations was very useful. And I mean, not useful as in like I would go and use it for myself, but kind of shaped my understanding of how to relate to all these people. And then of course when you start meeting different people in the scene, for example in the art scene or whatever, because I so many gay people in the art scene, right? Like everywhere you go it's just a homo. Everywhere it's just homos. And then so I got into like queer groups of friends, which is I think something that I really enjoyed having, because when I was in school there was no such thing, right? I was the only gay Eskimo, so like there was no
one to share the
no one to share the hate or the love or the anything, right? And then you end up dating the only other like queer person in the class, and then you know So I think because of that and because of my continued forays into activism and art, I think that really kind of sort of held me, right, as a burgeoning individual in the world, for better or worse.
That's a very interesting image.
I'm being cradled.
Yeah, yes, you are. Conceptually, do you think the idea of queerness is a bit strange or even foreign in Singapore?
I think that we borrow a lot of our ideas of queerness from foreign media, because that's, kind of the only place we used to get it, right?
Yep.
And then, when things like Peculiar Chris came out, or
what is that?
Oh, Peculiar Chris, sorry, is I'm giving Kevin like a crash course on
Yes,
queerness right now. It's very fun. It's this sort of landmark novel that was published, I think, in the 80s, if I'm not wrong, about this queer man's journey. It's not a very, I don't want to say it's a very bad book. It's not very good. It's just one of those books that was revolutionary for its time, right? And it was from Singapore. And then, when you talk about the literary queer canon in Singapore, you always talk about Peculiar Chris. And I think a lot of how we understand ourselves is also us looking out to the world and seeing, okay, maybe Taiwan has this thing we can borrow, like the way, for example, Taiwanese butchers dress, right? So I think a lot of, like in Taiwan or Shanghai or whatever, you have a lot of these ways of being, like lesbian aesthetics, for example, they are borrowed, and even those aesthetics are borrowed from like whatever's trendy at the time, right? Like K-pop or Japanese aesthetic. So I think for Singaporeans, because we were a colony, and also because our native people are now also minorities. I think there are different pockets of queerness, and the understanding of queerness is also culturally informed, right? If you talk about, say, Chinese butchers, it's going to be different from if you talk about like Malay butchers, or like hipster butchers, or literary butchers, or jocks, or whatever, right? And it's kind of interesting to see how we police each other as well in the queer community. Like some people, how do I put this? Like, for example, right, post the AIDS crisis, there was a lot of sort of like hyper masculine posturing amongst the gay community, because they didn't really want to be associated with I guess weakness as femininity, or femininity as weakness. And therefore, you have this whole like hyper masculinization of gay men. And then I think that's trickled down to today, because a lot of gay men also kind of are straight passing, but I think you see more less and less of that now. So I think queerness in Singapore is also governed by our understanding of other nations' queerness, and also our own cultural anxieties around power, or strength, or desirability, right? Like if, for example, I find fat people sexually attractive, like that's not going to be a norm anywhere really in either the gay or the lesbian community or the trans community or whatever, right? So I think it's just one of those things that are endlessly negotiated and contested, because questions of identity, of course, have always plagued the minority much more than the majority at hand, right? Like, have you ever wrestled with your identity? Like, how did you come to the conclusion that you were Kevin a certain way? Like, did you have to like come out to people?
like a party?
No.
I think to answer your question more specifically, I think you can associate. Okay, so let's say to answer your question, you can associate I can associate myself as a Kevin, because that is the conventional way of getting things done. And if you were to explain your whole thesis as to why you might not want to associate as Kevin and as something else, I think not a lot of people would have the attention span and have the capacity to take like a 2-hour explanation like that. So I think for a lot of reasons, yeah, I can answer to Kevin, but on the other side, I think when you think about things and stuff like that, I think the more you think about how you are in relation to different things and what you have experienced and stuff like that, I think the idea of Kevin kind of just diminishes and you're just something else. So, but as I say, to explain that to everyone you meet, I think that's a little bit too much. And if there's no alcohol involved, I think it's going to be very awkward. So
I feel like you should try it. I think it'll be a good opener.
As I say, I'm a recluse, so yeah, it's specific, yeah.
Yeah. But I think, right, when you talk about inner lives as well, there's a sense that people with rich inner lives have done a lot more reckoning to kind of define themselves to themselves, which I think, maybe you have. And so I don't think that that's something specific to the queer community, right? It's for anyone who feels like they don't really... they can't really be reduced to a certain set of essential traits. And I find that kind of comforting, actually, right? If you talk about labels, yeah, sure, labels are like a shorthand. Like when you say you're a recluse, right? Like, what does that mean for us? Like, do we treat you a certain way? Do we automatically understand things about your life that, we have to kind of make space for? And I think that labels only go so far as to kind of tell you maybe what is essential in that moment, right? Because I do go around telling people I'm gay. Like, I will have you know I love titties, but but it may not be relevant, right? And I think that from what I can see on the internet, Generation Z is doing a lot to change that, because I think the assumption now is everybody is some kind of genderqueer or, some kind of like, whatever, like non-binary, or not everybody's non-binary. Please don't quote me on that. But like, it's the boundary lines are getting more and more blurred. And I think that's quite fun. Kevin's boundary lines are getting blurred right now. So I think like questions of identity kind of, because okay, when you talk about being a queer writer especially, right? And when you write and when you submit to journals that are like, oh, we would like people of color to submit, or minorities, sexual minorities to submit, or whatever, I always get this feeling like I don't really qualify. I don't in the context of Singapore, because I am Chinese, right? And obviously very, very comfortable, very privileged Chinese, middle class, English educated, blah, blah, blah. And then, you have your queerness, and then, some people can say, oh, like you just sort of use that as your token calling card and say, yeah, I am minority, and like this is why my story is important, this is why you should publish me or whatever. And I don't know how to reconcile that. It's kind of like saying where's your niche, like you need to find a certain slant to be like, oh yeah, I'm different from everybody else. But I don't know, it feels cheap to kind of base the merit of your work solely on your identity politics.
Would it get to a point where all these labels become unhelpful?
I think yeah, definitely, right? Like, what are the labels for? If you're talking about specifically queerness, for example, I think for me, it's never really been helpful to say to cis-het people, hey, I'm whatever, right? I'm queer, because like, who knows what that means, I just go around licking the clits of women. No, but I just think it's easier for people to find each other. Like if you say, okay, I have a massive piss kink, for example, and you go on the internet and you say that, and everyone's like, yeah, I'm a pervert just like you, so it becomes a community rallying call, right? And I'm sure like you've had those moments as well. You find people who are just like you and then you feel comforted. But for anyone who's not in that in group, you know, it's like, oh, well, that means nothing to me.
You mentioned something about Gen Z being a lot more open about these things.
Yeah.
Would you be able to, do you have a reason or even like an explainer to yourself as to why this current generation is a lot more, I guess for lack of a better word, open?
But you notice it too, right? Like, do you have the same experience?
I guess I can make assumptions for what I can see online.
Yeah.
But as I said, I don't go out, so I don't have anybody who is within the scene or anything like that.
Yeah, I saw this tweet. I think it was maybe by my friend Justin, but I'm not sure. But I think he said, the reason I don't come out as non-binary is I'm too old." So there's this certain expectation that you need to be of a certain like burgeoning sexuality or, you know, burgeoning gender to come out as like one of the cool non-binary like
it's like
gender.
school over again.
Yes, exactly. It's like puberty, right? I'm too old to go through puberty one more time. And I think a lot of us have already had that puberty moment. But I think the reason why I think Gen Z is more open about it is, I mean, I'm not gonna speculate and say, oh, it's because of the internet. But I really do think it's because of the internet. And I think TikTok and, you know, for better or worse, whatever, Chinese spyware and all that. But I think being able to find each other has made such a difference in being able to articulate what they want, what they don't want, who they are at such a much earlier age than a lot of us were even able to, you know, kind of have the vocabulary to talk about these concepts to ourselves. And that's why I think, you know, like I've considered as well, like, you know, maybe I'm non-binary, maybe there are certain like days in the week I would like to not express my gender a certain way, but on some level it just seems so tiring, you know. It's like, man, now I have to reckon with whether or not I want boobs today. Like, I would love it if I had a modular body, right? If I could just like change out parts of my body, like, you know, the Mr. Potato Head in Toy Story.
That's a very and oddly specific reference. That's almost like 20 years ago, I think.
I'm almost 30. Yeah, but you know what I mean, right? It's like, sometimes I really wish that human existence could be like that. And then I tell other people, like, you know, wouldn't it be cool if we could all upload our consciousnesses to, you know, the cloud, and then we could... Have you seen that Black Mirror episode?
Which one?
San Junipero?
The one with the social credit score?
No. So San Junipero is
one.
the lesbian one where, you know, she kind of gets uploaded to the cloud. Then, you know, they can like rotate through decades, right? Yeah. And they're, you know, in different outfits every time and whatever, and like different get-ups. And I just found that like so freeing, you know, like what if every Thursday I had a cock or something and everyone's like, it's cock a day, like
it's cock day.
Today I have testicles, you know, and I think being able to kind of hold space for those desires is something that Gen Z is quite, I think, more successful at doing than previous generations. I think largely because they can imagine, you know, really, really like different ways of expressing sexual appeal and desirability than we have had, right? I mean, have you seen the cat boys on TikTok? And
what is a cat boy?
Oh boy.
Are you going to show it to me later?
I mean, I can show it to you.
Wonderful.
Oh, yeah, I mean, okay, like all these fey little feminine, not boys, but I guess they are kind of boys, dressed up in, you know, what have you, made outfits or cat ears or dresses. And, you know, you have like all of these coming out experiences, like this guy on TikTok who tried on a dress for a joke because he thought like, oh, it was gonna be funny, haha, you know, like this other guy looks really hot in a dress and I don't. But he tried it on and he had like this moment of awakening, like, oh my god, I actually have beautiful mama. And then, you know, it was just it's just nice because you don't get to see people in their everyday lives doing that. Like you didn't, right? And now you do because of this culture of oversharing that we've all been propelled into.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's quite lovely and quite intimate, right? If we can keep all of the hyper scrutinization out of it.
I think that could be a part of it. I think you have to take the good and the bad. And I feel that there's no way around it. I think there is no way we could move forward the next couple of years without social media. I think the social media is going to stay. There could be limits on it, but I think the cat's off the bag for that, and how it develops and how it changes this Gen Z when they become 30s and let's say we become 40s and 50s. I think it's all an experiment being played out, to be honest. Yeah, there is, because the studies and everything are still catching up. I think right now they are just figuring out that, okay, maybe Instagram for kids might not be so good.
Yeah, no shit.
Yeah, so anyone could have told you that. But unfortunately, I think studies like this, it takes time. You need to look at it over a course of maybe 5 years just to get an accurate, scientifically backed and peer-reviewed thing. And by the time the things come out, I mean, the person you're studying could be 25 with a whole lot of issues. But unfortunately, that's the world we live in.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's like that thing where, what was it, fetal alcohol syndrome, and they didn't know about the effects.
Wait, what?
Yeah,
what is that?
Because there was a period of time where it was okay for pregnant women to drink. I mean, they didn't know, right, what the effects of that would be on the child until it was way too late, and then a whole generation of children were born like that. And I think it's kind of like saying, oh, just use your common sense. And then, obviously, common sense isn't common, or what we thought would have been good for the children, like spanking, for example. And now, studies are showing that spanking isn't actually good for your child. But I think that's my sort of my pain point with academia. It's not ever going to develop as fast as real life is, right? And I think that's where anecdotal evidence comes in, or when you do sort of informal studies on people's experiences or whatever. But of course the danger of that is then how do you verify if everybody is having a mass hysteria about this thing, or all the anti-vaxxers are in a silo and they're all
Yep.
the horse pill works for the COVID. Yeah.
So how do you filter out, or how do you look for helpful truths in this world of oversharing and abundance of information, where it seems like what you think might be true, someone else might think it's false, because there's so many narratives around everything out there. Yeah. I was just having an argument about this the other time. And I think, when you talk about believing people's lived narratives, right, there is also that. And I think saying, okay, maybe this might not be true for you personally, but it is true definitely for these other people, and they might not experience the world exactly in the way you do, but you can't deny that this is a thing that's happening, right? So I think that keeping that sort of open mind, but critically, is really important to me. And of course, I'm not the best person at doing it. So sometimes I believe things, and I often believe things that are extremely questionable and extremely whack, out of this, Able to give an example?
I'm a witch lah. What other example do you want me to give other than...
That seems a lot more acceptable today then.
Today, yeah, definitely. Yeah. But is it because we have lost faith in our medical systems and our religions, and
I just think it's cool to have witches. Yeah, that's all.
I also think it's cool to have witches, but sometimes it's this witch does not know what she is doing, man. She does not know what the hell she's getting herself into, and I think that there is that, right? You always want to find people who believe in the same outrageous things as you do, but sometimes they're like, oh, they just come out to me and they're like, I'm a Luciferian. I'm like, okay, thank you very much. I don't know what to do with that information. So everyone's trying to find their kindred spirits, right? But I think the way I do it is I have a few people whose perspectives I cherish, right? And those people are kind of my litmus tests, right? So I'll go up to them and be like, hey, does this sound bullshit to you? And I think like people do that to me too, right? They show me something and they're like, am I crazy? Or, is this like, whatever? I'm like, yes, bitch, you are crazy, but it also does look kind of suspicious, and then we go from there. That being said, though, I don't think, I'm sure you don't either. I don't think that there is any one objective truth. And I think truth can be warped, right? It is the whole, I guess, philosophy of magic to, kind of say sometimes what is real can be changed through will,
intent.
Like, yeah.
Yep.
Yes, exactly. Will and intent alone. So if you do that, then, I have another friend who says that every time you lie, you kind of warp reality a little bit. So it is very dangerous. And this, what is this? Yes, so this poet that I really admire, C. Conrad, also says that if you talk about trauma when you are drunk, the body doesn't remember the trauma as the trauma was when it first happened. It kind of pegs it to when you next talk about it, right? So every time you rehash it, you are kind of
reliving it.
Yeah, reliving it, and also kind of burying it deeper into you, because that becomes a place that you can't really access when you are sober. And I think that's kind of dangerous, because then you place the trauma in a place where you find it difficult to exercise or like kind of heal from, because you don't really know what you are doing in a conscious manner when like you sort of like try and talk about your trauma, but it becomes this thing that you're not really aware of in your conscious waking life. And I think that's that was kind of intense to me, because how many people like are drunk and then they talk about all the shit that's ever happened to them in their life.
Your partner's nodding. Okay. Okay.
Oh no.
Okay. So,
oh no, it got too deep.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think of that as another way in which to think about reality, or the way in which we shape our own realities. And I don't know if I'm starting to sound like a mindfulness course, but like,
I think I'll give you 5 more minutes. You might actually. I think, but isn't this something that one should at least know about or be cognizant of earlier, as opposed to hopefully finding or chancing upon it in a literature text, or someone were to have a conversation about it and you realize it, because it sounds like it could be terribly insidious, like you are repeating the same mistakes, or you're repeating these traumas, but you might not even know about it, because I think there's still a lot of mysteries to how the mind works and the body, and if you believe it, the soul and spirit and stuff like that. Yeah. There's still a lot of mysteries to it.
What are you gonna say, right? Like, hey, I want everybody in addition to their sex ed, have soul ed, right? I'm gonna teach you how not to fuck up your soul at an early age. It's already so hard to get schools not to teach abstinence. How are we going to convince them that, taking care of your actual... It's not even about your soul, right? It's also about your mental health and, the way in which you sort of process things. But that's very lesbian of me to say, because it's like the cliche is like, oh, like a good old-fashioned lesbian process. Like you sit down and talk about your feelings with all your lesbian friends.
Is it like a normal human thing to do?
I don't know. It's, okay, but the way they frame it is like, oh, let's process these feelings together. And then we, emerge from it like you better. I don't know. I thought everyone did that, but it turns out not a lot of people do that,
Okay.
Like it was kind of shocking to me, because I was also having this conversation, and I said, don't you and your friends have really intense conversations, and then you emerge from it we've leveled up in our intimacy or whatever. But apparently no, it's not a universal experience. But I love that.
That's interesting. So taking a diversion back to witchcraft, which I find to be pretty interesting. You mentioned that you describe yourself as a witch. Could you please explain on that?
Are you a witch?
Not in the conventional sense.
Okay. Well, I don't think I'm a witch in the What is the conventional sense? Like we fly around on broomsticks cackling naked?
I wish it was that cool, but I think I would imagine if you are a witch, or I guess the male counterpart will be a warlock and whatever's in between, they'll be practicing stuff.
There'll be what?
You'll be practicing
Yes.
it on a regular basis.
Yes.
You read up on it. I don't know if you attend Zoom classes for it. I don't know if that's...
I was thinking about
thing.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's at least what I think about it, yeah.
First of all, I want to clarify that a witch is not the female equivalent of a warlock. A warlock is more like a magical sugar baby, and a witch is someone who kind of deals in like herbs and divination and like spell making. But a warlock has a magical patron that they are self-adopted by and get their magics from. But freaking J.K. Rowling and her transphobia nonsense thinks that witch and wizard are like the two magical genders. So
The magical genders.
let's just put that to rest, shall we?
Unfortunately, my idea of the magical is awfully colored by World of Warcraft and things of the
Oh my
like.
God,
So
cute.
so you have to explain what is your definition there? Yeah.
Aiyo. Sorry, I said aiyo not because I don't want to explain, but because it's gotten to a point where I feel like I'm actually getting more and more Catholic as I age, which is kind of embarrassing to admit because, you know, in the past because I was raised Catholic, right? So, but I had a falling out with
God?
okay, Daddy God.
Okay.
And you know, because of the whole gay thing and whatever. But it's been interesting for me because then I stepped away from it and started looking at alternative systems of belief. And I think that my understanding of witchcraft or, you know, like any kind of occult nonsense is you are in charge of your own destiny. You are in charge of your own myth making or what have you, whatever gods you want to align yourself with. That has to be your agency and your choice, right? Whether or not you choose to practice like whatever, like, you know, that binary of like good magic or bad magic, that's also your choice, right? That belief system is yours and yours alone to choose. And of course, there are some people who are like, oh, I was like, the witchcraft was passed down to me. I don't really have a choice in it. Or, you know, it's a gift that was, you know, whatever, inherited. Yeah, sure. You know, that there's that also, right? So you exist kind of in the margins outside of organized religion and, you know, like legitimate religion, whatever, right? Like if I went to the ICA and said, yeah, can you put down my religion as like witch? Like, you know, they would just be like, okay, ma'am.
Questionable stares.
Yeah. But I think that that's why witchcraft and queerness have always gone hand in hand, because they always kind of form this marginal existence, and witchcraft especially sort of reclaims power from the organized religion and seeks to make it your own, right? The actor's own intent or will, what have you. And I found it quite empowering. But I think there are certain ways of also marrying, like, for example, folk religion, right? You marry your pagan or your heathen religions of the land with whatever colonizing force came after that. And then I don't know, I kind of see it as piggybacking as well. You piggyback on someone else's god and you kind of like subsume it into your own traditions. And that's, I guess, my relationship with witchcraft has always been, look, the Catholic Church is stupid about some things. Let's not get our beliefs wholesale from it. But at the same time, I also recognize that belief is a very strong force, you know, and being able to change your beliefs or being able to control what you believe in, or, you know, at least have a say in the doctrine that you feed yourself is, I think, it's quite an act of love, actually, right? To be able to reclaim your stories and your myths and your I guess, like warning rules.
I think that's empowerment right there. Like I think the idea of reclaiming or even owning, I think that's a really strong thing to not identify with, but internally know, like this is my story ultimately, because everything is contributing to this story that you are writing. At the end of the day, whatever people reading your story are the ones who have interacted with you or experienced you to a certain degree, and they will pass on the story and so on and so forth.
Yeah, but it's also incredibly hubristic of us to say, you know what, like, I'm in complete control of my story, you know, like...
We are not in complete control, which we fool ourselves into thinking we're in complete control.
So I think that is the balance, right? Are you going to sort of petition the gods to be like, oh, please, you know, like the landlord is being difficult. Are you just going to poison the cows yourself? I think that is the difference for me.
I think you have to burn some offering for them.
Yeah.
I think that's what they like.
What, the landlords?
No, God. So I'm curious to know, are there any aspects of witchcraft that you disagree with then?
Oh man. I mean, if you know me, you'd know that I don't like telling people what to do. And I think the only thing that I don't agree, like, that I would never do is a love potion, like, you know, some kind of like love spell to make someone fall in love with you. Like if it's just a spell for attraction or whatever, that's fine, that's whatever. But if you particularly want to make someone else do something against their will, and especially love, right? Because it's, I mean, oh my God, not to come across as like a fucking romantic, but can you imagine like the idea of love as it is going to be completely like perverted and destroyed by the mere idea that you can control something like that, right? It would just be a mere facsimile.
It shatters the illusion of it.
Yeah, I mean, not even like, do you believe in love? Oh, Kevin's shaking his head. He doesn't believe in love.
I do not actually. I think love is
neurological.
It's a shorthand for a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And I also do believe that people attribute certain experiences as love, but because we each have a different definition of it. And by that, as we talked about, there is no common reality. So by that, it means that this thing it's always in front of us, but I don't think we'll ever reach it. We can attribute different things or different feelings, but those are more neurological or things that perhaps from your past, perhaps people told you about it. So there are all the different things that factor into these puzzle piece, but there is no one true love. Yeah.
One true love.
Yeah.
One true pairing. Yeah, I don't know if I agree with you. I would say that yes, I don't think that love is a universal experience for everybody in the way that we experience it. But I think that love, as we kind of refer to it, is sort of like this ineffable force that drives a lot of human motivation and I don't know what, like desire or, you know, like just your basic will to live. And I think that in itself has power, and I think it's kind of sacred in a way, but I don't mean like romantic love, you know, like it's, I mean, I think romantic love is a lie that's been sold to women to like convince them to get married to their patriarchal whatever in their lives, right? But love as in something that puts the life back into whatever you're doing, right? If you do it for love, for example, if you create things out of love for whatever, like a concept or a god or whatever, I think that that's kind of impossible to replicate and special in a way. And so I think, you know, trying to say, oh, you know, I'm going to make this person fall in love with me, it's like, it's all well and good until you actually do it. And so I don't think I disagree with it, like on a moral standpoint. I just don't think if you think that if you want to say you're doing it, I don't think you know what you're talking about. So it's like a very, are you sure?
It is a bit iffy to a certain degree if you think about it, yeah.
It's kind of like this, I don't know, it's like an amateur red flag, like, is that what we're doing today?
So what about the the greater concepts of good and evil then?
Wow.
Do you believe in those macro ideas then? Since it seems like the conversation is delving into this trajectory, so let's hit straight there.
It all gets very philosophical at some point. I think that I don't want to say that I have an entirely pragmatic view towards good or evil, but I think that when we talk about good, right, I think we cannot be good. I think we can only do good. Like if you say someone is a good person, I don't think that means anything. It's like saying someone is nice. Like, what the fuck does that mean, right? Like, please lah, it's just like they have no other personality besides that. And I think good very often comes with the ideas of being obedient, of being respectable, or what have you, and virtue, right? Which I find doesn't it's like being polite, right? Everyone does it to some degree, right? I mean, if you've met like an extremely rude person for like in all aspects of their life, I mean, like I kind of find that quite admirable, but also they're tiring to be around. So it's a social lubricant in the way that good is also kind of like a social lubricant. Everyone's like, okay, don't beat the baby on the bus's head because that's not very nice. Yeah. But when you get down to it, right, like what is morally right or wrong, I think that the idea of good and moral grayness and evil has been used by a lot of very smart people to justify a lot of heinous things that they have done, right, in the name of the greater good. I mean, just look at our fucking government. But like it's not something that I put a lot of stock in, because I am a person who believes that if you want to reframe that, you can, right? And only you will know whether or not you genuinely believe in this idea, or you're just using it as a tool to, like ingratiate yourself with whatever the hell you want. But I mean, is there pure good? Is there pure evil in this world? I feel like these moments are rare and kind of boring, to be honest. Like, if you spend your life in the pursuit of goodness, like, shut up.
I think narratively, there could be a reason why when we dial that to the extreme, we enjoy watching it narratively, because it's a movie, it's a production, it's only for like 2 hours, and we enjoy seeing what that could be to the extreme where there is like a single focus. But then when the movie ends, then it's up to us how to interpret that particular piece of media.
I think, which is why I find superhero movies so unbearable, you know? Like they're just, oh my god, I'm a good guy, but now I'm not really good guy, and now I'm bad. I'm just like, shut the fuck up, like who cares? Give me the, just the ambiguous kind of, like ambiguous even to yourself, right? You don't even know if you're doing the right thing, which is I think why I was reading this interview about Studio Ghibli's Princess Mononoke, and it was really difficult for the American translators when they translated it into English, because they were like, I don't get it, is the person the bad guy or the good guy? And then the studio was like, no, they are just guys.
Yep.
Right?
I've always felt that there was a discrepancy between not just like a translation thing, but how, I guess, Western media in general, how they portray these themes compared to how Eastern media portrays it. Because in Eastern media, it is a lot more fluid. It's a lot more fluid in a sense where they are just people. It's very human stories down to the animation. Brilliant. But I guess in Western media, there always has to be a bad guy, and let's say the bad guy always likes to monologue the plans, and the bad guy always has to be stopped. I don't believe I've seen a show or a piece of media where the bad guy wins and it ends on that. There is always like a climactic, like it ends and then the bad guy loses, or the bad guy changes, or the bad guy changes to being a good guy, or like somewhere in the middle.
Some kind of redemption arc, basically. That's really annoying, right? It's like you cannot win unless you have earned it.
I think it's unfortunate that once you realize these themes are at play, and I guess even being part of even recognizing how these productions are made. I mean, it is for mass. It is not for people to pick apart and to think about these themes. Like you watch a movie, you think about it for like 5 years. I don't think it's for that. So I think it's for people to consume and to just take their mind off things for like 2 hours or like even 8 hours for a show. So I guess from that point of view, it kind of makes sense. So
it kind of blows my mind actually that people want to escape into media. Like, I'm always looking to be extremely traumatized and disturbed by media.
You're always looking to be extremely traumatized.
Yeah.
Why is that?
I mean, not traumatized, but disturbed definitely, right? Because I think it's valuable when a piece of media is able to bring my understanding to a place that I haven't sort of like considered before, right? And I think because I don't know if it's because I grew up on 4chan, which is like has been described variously as the asshole of the internet, or because, you know, I have a very like shitty levels of dopamine in my brain or whatever. But I think for me, a feel-good movie is never going to be as valuable to me as a very extremely, as a disturbing or weird or, you know, like genuinely bizarre movie, right? And I think a lot of that has to do with a love of predictability. Unpredictability, right? And I just want to see something that I haven't seen before, right? I don't know if you feel the same way about escapism.
It depends at what point am I viewing those media, and it really depends if I have set the time out to just enjoy it.
Yeah.
But I guess to that point, there's also one of the best things about, I guess, let's say YouTube as a service. It allows people with different perspectives to upload their analysis or even their point of views about certain types of media that it would definitely not be possible 2 decades ago. So you get to hear what I like to do is that, let's say I watch the X-Men, for example. Let's say the X-Men. Run-of-the-mill comic book movie, and I can go onto YouTube and I can search like 5 to 10 different creators, and then each get their different take and how they relate to it, their history, and I think I get a very good or even accurate sense as to A, what the creator is doing, what their intentions are at that point in time when they create it, B, the movie, and C, the different takes on it and what it means for them, really. So I think it goes beyond just, let's say, that 2 hours in the cinema. It definitely goes beyond that because it is laborious. Everything that we see on maybe even TikTok, Instagram, everything is labor. Yeah. Everything is like it's just that we just see the finished product.
Yeah.
So to your point about interesting media, have you watched anything recently that surprised you?
Oh no.
Have you watched or consumed anything?
Yeah, I watched The Medium actually, and it was, do you watch horror movies?
No.
Okay, so The Medium is by the director of Shutter, I think, and it was produced by...
The Thailand one?
Yes, the Taiwan. The amazing, famous, like, favorite movie
the
of all
last
time.
scene, that one.
That one, right. So if you're a horror movie fan, you'll know, of course.
Everybody knows that scene. Yeah.
And produced by the producer of The Wailing, I think. So very, you know, like it's cut its teeth on some like great horror canon, right? But it was kind of the first movie that had me kind of shaking in my seat, because usually I'm not the kind of moviegoer that gets scared by horror movies.
Oh, shaking in horror. I thought excitement.
I mean, also excitement.
Okay,
there are a lot of kinks that are, you know, like covered in that movie. If you watch it, you'll know what I mean. But I think because the horror, like the medium kind of played on the tropes of horror movies, but didn't do it in a way that was sort of tired or, you know, like overdone. It felt real, you know, and I mean, to add to that, it was also a mockumentary. So it, you know, kind of like the first 5 minutes, I turned to my partner, I was like, you didn't tell me this was a documentary. And she was like, yeah, it's a documentary. Didn't you read the description?
The first 5 minutes?
No, bitch, I didn't read the fucking description. So I think, yeah, I was very convinced that obviously when all the other stuff starts, then I'm just like, okay, fine, this is way too convenient to be like any kind of documentary. It's obviously fake. But, you know, like up to a certain point, like maybe half an hour before the movie ended, she was like, this is fake, right? This is fake, right? This is fake, right? And it was like, I think it was surprising because I've come to expect a certain level of, okay, we don't go there when it comes to horror movies. Like, for example, you very rarely see people taking a shit on each other in like a conventional horror movie when like you go to watch it in the cinemas. You know, that's kind of like indie movie territory, right? And I'm not saying that happened in the movie, but like it's the horror was a certain amount of dread. And I guess it just felt like these people knew and had done their research on real happenings that, you know, like real hauntings or whatever, but not in the way that Hollywood does it, which is like, oh, this is based on a real story, and then it doesn't look like a real story at all. Yep. You know, I'm James Wan. So I don't know what to say except that it kind of, I was expecting it to be good, but not this good, you know? And I think it accessed a lot of like my personal trauma that I found very sort of like, I felt kind of violated because I was like, how do you know this about me? Like, how do you know that this would trigger me? So, you know, I think that when you dare to make a piece of media that's specific, it kind of creates this sense of like recognition, right? And like maybe horrible recognition, but also very enjoyable. Like, oh, I feel seen, you know, by this piece of media. And I think that that's the power in sort of creating something that is not pandering to a general audience. Which is also kind of why I try to do with my book, right? Like I thought that no one would like it because I wrote it so specifically to my own experience. But you know, turns out many people are also huge lesbian perverts, so that's very nice.
So you found your crowd.
Yeah, I found my crowd.
That's a brilliant segue to your book. So let's talk about it. Or are you sick of talking about it?
I mean, I don't want to say I am because like that sounds ungrateful. No, it's just I feel like I don't know if I have anything interesting to say about it that hasn't been said yet. But what do you want to know about the book? Okay,
for the listeners, so just give me a description of the book and what it's about and the process of writing it. Why write something like this? I read snippets of it and I found it to be the most interesting. I have no experience with poetry. It is, to me, like the opposing creative medium coming from the visual arts. I think poetry, spoken word, and I think even performances, that is completely foreign to me.
Right.
Yeah.
That's very curious because then what about people who are both visual artists and poets, right?
I haven't come across much. I haven't seen a lot of examples, but yeah.
Right. Yeah, maybe usually they're better at one than the other. I don't know.
Yeah, but I'm sure there are a lot of gradations, but it's just not as common.
Yeah. Well, okay, so the book is called Gaze Back, and it is, what do I call it? A trans-genre lesbian grimoire that you never knew you needed. It talks about feminism and especially like the queer body using witchcraft as a tool to kind of reclaim power from the patriarchy and religion and, you know, basically body policing and respectability politics, that kind of thing. Yeah, and so it was my first book of poetry. I don't know if it will be my last.
What was your headspace like when you wrote it or when you conceived of the idea of writing it?
I was kind of angry because I was in a space where I was discontent at the kind of art that I was consuming in the art scene. I felt like it wasn't pushing the kind of like boundary lines that I wanted to see pushed. And I felt like no one was being explicit enough. No one was talking about the kind of, conversations that they would have with their friends or whatever. This is like, oh, it's a widely acknowledged problem or whatever, but it isn't acknowledged in your art, right? So to be able to take those concepts and translate them, and of course I myself as a young-ish woman, with a history of like, being sexually assaulted on trains or whatever, right? It kind of stemmed from feeling unsafe as well, and that anger kind of produced a space in which I wanted to bite back, right? I wanted to hit back at like all of these things that have caused me violence, that have caused me pain. And I think that Gaze Back was written from a very sort of like, I wrote it to be a weapon, in a very real sense, like a spell is a weapon, or a curse is a weapon, right? But it was also an act of solidarity. It was also an act of love to, all the unloved bodies that I had seen and was seeing at that time. So when I wrote it, there was this period. So at my launch, right, I asked my friend Marla to come and perform. And Marla's a singer as well as an artist, and so I told her, I gave her a copy of the book, and I said, oh, I wrote this for you, and I meant it. Like, I wrote this for all of the marginalized, all of the over-policed queer and trans bodies. And then like a couple of, I think maybe 6 months later, she called me, and then she was kind of in a bad headspace, and she said, oh, why did you write this for me? And I was like, I can't tell you why, but I was kind of shocked that she remembered that, about the book, and she was in a bad headspace, and she was flipping through the book and reading through it like a Bible. And then I was like, oh, I positioned it like a Bible, right? Because like a grimoire, but like a spell book, which is like sort of like your witch's Bible. But I didn't intend for it to come true in like such a literal fashion. So I think that was kind of it was quite powerful for me, like shocking, but also strangely like gratifying. Like, if I can't be there for you, at least my book is there with you.
Yep.
So I think that's the space that I wanted it to occupy in the first place. I'm like, Marylyn, you fucking asked for this, stupid.
Were you writing it from your perspective, or were you writing it from a fictional character's point of view, that it belongs to this fictional character or something like that?
I feel like it deals with concepts. I'm not a very sort of like, I don't speak from like first person very well. I don't like confessional poetry or whatever. I like to draw up like a premise, but not a character, right? So sort of like really concept. Like, that's how some of my poems begin, like concept. This is the concept. Now we're gonna like explore it. So I think for me, that the ambiguous space of not having to come up with a narrative to tell, to talk about a theme, is very important to poetry. And I think that's why poetry lends itself so well to revolution and ideas, right? Because Audre Lorde says that, like, poetry holds in it the possibility that to imagine that which we have no words yet to imagine.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's really gorgeous. It's in an essay called Poetry is Not a Luxury, and it cannot be a luxury, especially for marginalized people who so often don't have the luxury of imagining their lives already as it is, surviving in this system or in this world.
So I'm curious to know, the book is a success, has won awards.
Award.
Regardless, award. Okay.
One award.
Okay. I'm curious to know if you have been approached by people that you do not know, you haven't spoken to before, but they have read your book, but they have an impression about you based on the book. and they've talked to you about it. Has that ever been the case before?
Yeah, definitely. Wow, it was so weird because I'm not gonna say who, but like I got messaged by this guy. I'm sure he's a very nice man, but I don't know him, you see. And I think the feeling that I got from his like sliding into my DMs was, hey, you're a very sexual person and I'm looking for a very sexual person to like make a new piece of art. And I've been like what's the word, censored before, but like I'm looking for someone as crazy as me to do like my new project and whatever, which is fine and all, but it's also like I think that a lot of people assume hypersexuality, which is true, but a lot of men assume hypersexuality, and then like that's when my penis is like, I'm not interested in this kind of sexual like advanced things. And then you have the usual like people who at writer events or anything, then they just come up to you and they say shit like, oh, my child is also kind of disturbed and she loves things like I don't know what like horror movies and spiders, and they were like, what advice would you have for them? And I'm like,
Wait, the parents came up to you?
Yeah, the mom came up to me and she said, oh, her daughter loves dark things just like you. And I was like, thanks, auntie. I don't know what to tell her except keep going, girl.
I don't believe you could have anticipated this when you have written it.
I mean, how do you like? Are you trying to ask me to tell your kid to be more disturbed? What is it? Like, maybe I should have given her like a book recommendation. Like, yeah.
So for the sake of clarity, what is your book recommendation?
Doesn't it depend on who the person is? I don't really have like a go-to book recommendation that I think everyone should read. I mean, obviously, I think everyone should read C.A. Conrad. I think Kathy Acker is really great. Blood and Guts in High School. And especially if you're talking about local authors, Ilang Govan has always been my baby. Actually, no lah, he's not always been my baby. I remember Ilang Govan's a playwright, and he is famous for plays like Smegma and Talak, which means divorce. And he speaks to sort of like the underbelly of society that we rarely talk about. So also very graphic, very sexual, very sort of like debased and vulgar sometimes. And I remember picking up his book when I was in secondary school. I was like, what's this shit? It's all in Singlish. Then I went back to it like I think 5 years later. I was like, oh my god, this guy's a genius.
What changed within the time?
I think I just like expanded my ideas of what good writing is. When you're a kid, I mean, I don't know if this is the case for you, but when we're students, we get told that like standard English is the only English that you should aspire to. I mean, obviously because they need to get us to pass our O levels, right? So you get into this habit. I mean, I still do it sometimes because I'm a snob, but you get into this whole like, oh well, he can't even speak proper English, so obviously the writing must be shit, or maybe his ideas are not great because like that sort of prescriptivism is conflated with he doesn't have good ideas. But the concept of using Singlish as a register to communicate things was like not told to it and like not expressed, or I had not experienced that before. So when I went back to it and then I read it in full, and it was talking about, I think the one that stuck with me the most was when I think this Malay trans woman was talking about like her penis or whatever, and I think she was on the MRT or something, and then she was carrying it. Or I might be mistaking that for like an Alfian Saad one. But anyway, so a lot of queer writing as well, I think, in his work. And I remember thinking like, you don't really see any of this, in like local literature, or you see very little of it. I mean, of course, Alfian Saad was also a huge influence, because he, along with Cyril Wong and Ng Yisheng, were kind of the first queer writers that I ever came across. And Alfian especially, because he would talk about the gay like sexual experience in his plays, or whatever. And there would be this moments like, I wish that lesbians would talk about the lesbian sexual experience in plays, like in the same honest and frankly kind of disturbing to an audience that hasn't experienced it before way. And I think that that's also how I sort of envision my book, like being able to speak about the body in a way that was freeing to me, right, rather than run circles around it and euphemism.
So this might be a bit of a strange question, but do you agree with the success of the book?
Do I agree with it?
Like, is it, after having written it, is it something that you are proud of? Like, is it something that you wish could have done better? Is it something that you do desperately want to rewrite but have to move on? So I'm just curious to know, like, is that something you think about?
I think I poured everything I had into it at the time. I don't think that, because I think I'm just such a snob about writing. So I would be like, oh, I'm not gonna make an anthology of like all of the poetry that I've written so far. I'm gonna write an entirely new book, So there's this sort of like, from conception to finish, it was a full thing. It was a full manuscript. It wasn't like greatest hits of Marylyn Tan shit, So I mean, no shade to anyone who does that, and people do it often and well, but I think that for me, this baby sort of like I conceived this baby and like delivered it all in one go. So I think that I can't change it even if I wanted to, right? It was genuinely sort of like receiving or incubating a project and undergoing it. I'm just surprised, like at people liking it so much, because I was fully prepared for like maybe 2 people to like it.
Your mom and your dad?
No, not even my mom and my dad.
Okay.
Oh my god, they were so like, why did you write this?
Okay.
Yeah, they were not happy being Catholics and straight people. But I think, if anything, it's only made me feel less alone, like, oh, it's not who is going to stop you. It's like, who is going to start you. Because very often people are, I think we all have these moments of like, well, I can't do that. It's obviously like too outrageous or too like out there, no one will like it. It's like, just do it, it's do the weird thing. It's not ever going to be as weird as you think it is, because bitch, you're not that special,
That's a quotable right there.
Oh no.
So in running with the baby metaphor, so it has been a couple of years since the book has been published, and you've been interviewed ad nauseum about it. So I'm just curious to know, how's the baby doing right now? What image do you have?
We just reprinted, so that's nice.
Okay.
The baby's going to school.
Okay.
I finally got to take out my misspelling of gelat, because I'm very upset about it, because like when it was first published, I think Joshua Ip shared like a screen, like a photo of the page, where I was talking about nasi kangkang, which is like a Malay folk practice where you sort of bewitch a man with your vaginal fluids. Anyway, so there's this word that I use in the poem called jelak, and it's it means like you're sick of something. You've had too much of something, basically. And I spelled it wrongly. And
didn't you say you were a snob?
Yeah, I am.
You said it twice on the podcast.
Yes, I am a snob, but I'm also an idiot.
Okay.
And I'm not, okay, like I should have, in hindsight, gone to like one of my Malay friends, or like had a Malay sensitivity reader and said, hey, is this thing spelled? Because so many eyes looked at it, like so many pairs of eyes, it went through so many people and nobody said anything. So I was just like, oh, I guess that's fine then, that then again, right? It's just nobody's fault but mine, but I finally got it changed and I'm just like, yes. And also there's like a grammar error that nobody ever pointed out, but I know where it is. And like, if you know where it is. Like, good on you too.
You get a free book.
Yeah.
You get a free signed copy.
Yeah, and I think that was quite satisfying for me. And I think people are interested in it even like overseas. So that's been nice. You know, people have said, oh, you know, we're going to bring your book to our friends, or we're going to send it to, you know, whoever, blah, blah, blah. So I think like I was kind of surprised because it's a very Singaporean book, right? It's like very located in Singaporeanness. And, but maybe I have underestimated the appeal. So that's quite sweet.
Is the success of the book daunting? Daunting in a sense when you conceive of, let's say, a professional career in writing, it's going to be like perhaps the next 10, 20, even 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
Like the success of the first book is so successful. Is it daunting? Like if you want to write, like perhaps the next book or something else, like you're always reminded of this runaway success and you feel that you might not be able to live up to it. Is it? Yeah. Do you feel that?
Oh, definitely. And coupled with the fact that I haven't been able to write for the past like 3 or 4 years, right? So in any like big capacity, also because I started working. So capitalism is bad for art. And it's just been a bit difficult to say, okay, you know, maybe I can do a second project that is maybe not as hard-hitting and epic. Like, will you still love me if I'm not the angry rebel of like, you know, when I was 23? My girlfriend's shaking her head. She will not.
So she's still the angry rebel when she was at 23.
No love for mellow Marylyn. No lah. I mean, I think that yes, there is that pressure, right, to like keep producing good work. But it's also a standard that I hold very dearly to myself. So I think thanks for asking that, because like a lot of my struggling with making new things has also, I think, been a response to that. Like me trying to get out of my own head and say, you know what, just fucking shit out the goddamn thing already. Like, you think people care? You think, you know, like, who gives a shit? Just write it and then we'll talk about it. And then if you're not happy with it, then we can like write the next thing. You know, people write more than one book in their lives. It's okay. Some of them are flops, some of them are not. And then, you know, like the perfectionist, like overachieving A+ student in me is like, no, we are going to get distinction for every project.
What distinction? Who's grading you?
Exactly. Who is grading you?
No one's grading you.
I'm grading me.
So in a sense, I like the duality there. It's like your 23-year-old self is talking to your age now.
I call it, to my therapist, I call it toxic Marylyn and rational Marylyn. Then like she'll be like, okay, so what do you think we should do with toxic Marylyn? I'm like, we should tie her up and throw her into a closet and set her on fire. And she's like, that's not very healthy.
You don't know that she might be killed like that. She might survive.
I'm too toxic.
Do you think that is integral? Do you think that's an integral part of the creative process?
I think some people have a harder time with it than others do. I kind of wish that I was like one of those prolific authors that could just write and then just give it and just put it out into the world, and they're like, oh, you know, I have a new book like every year or something. But I suspect that is also a part of me saying like, I want to point to all these things and say, hey, look, I'm a productive human being. I'm a valued member of society. Please love me. Which is kind of antithetical, you know, to the whole like making art because you feel like it needs to be made. It needs to be said. I don't hear people talking about it a lot. I think also because it's hard to admit that you kind of feel that way. Like, I don't know, I feel like writers are sometimes a little bit precious about their craft. Like, they're afraid to say, oh, you know, maybe I'm not that great this time round, or, you know, like, oh, I'm in my flop era, right? So I think I haven't really been able to hear that. Like, I've always heard, you know, even in residencies or, you know, when you're talking to other authors, they're always just like, yeah, I'm working on this new thing, blah, blah, blah. But they don't tell me like, I'm insecure about it because I don't think anybody will love it. Like, no one's going to tell you that, you know, no one's going to say, I think it's kind of a shitty idea, but I'm in love with it.
I'm just curious to know your idea of productivity. Like at this point in time, what does it mean to you? Because
I've been struggling with that, because I like doing a lot of things. I also do art, and a lot of things for very little to show for it, I think. A lot of okay, so when you do an event, right, or when you do a workshop, or when you have an exhibition or whatever, all these things are things that you can ostensibly put on your portfolio or on your CV or whatever, or you do an interview, on a podcast or whatever. But I think that for a long time, this was the way I justified productivity to myself. I also recently unpacked this with my therapist, and I was like, I don't think that I can justify spending free time unless I'm doing something that results in a tangible result, So I don't know if you have that, but I can't, when I have fun, it's not really having fun. It's kind of oh, I'm just gonna sort of paint, and then maybe I can turn it into a print, and then maybe I can make it into a sticker.
So it has to be a product at the end of the day.
Yeah,
that is exhausting.
It's really fucking exhausting, and I sometimes it does happen that way, and sometimes it's just in the back of my mind, we have to make this good because then it could have a life beyond the sketchbook or beyond the whatever, right? And in that same vein, I think that's why I don't write for fun anymore. It's always someone commissions me to write something, and I'm just oh well, yeah, I guess I could write something for you.
So you can write. It's you need someone to so you can write.
I have written many things. Yeah. I just haven't written anything that I think is a good thing, something to rival the work of Giesbeck, which is kind of shitty. Can you imagine you have a child, then you're oh, this child is ugly, it's not as beautiful as his older brother, so we're not going to give it love. You just stay locked out in the basement
I think taking away the locking out of the basement, I think that's what parents actually do. I'm not surprised if that's the reality. That sounds like a very parent thing to think about, even to subconsciously do.
That is so
the favoritism and everything.
Wow. You don't hide your child away.
As in, take away the hiding in the basement, but the unconscious favoritism, because perhaps one child might be excelling better and stuff like that. I think it's a very human thing to do.
Yeah, but can you imagine they're oh yeah, don't look at this child, look at this one, at family events or whatever.
I'm sure you've been to family events that happens.
Wow. I don't know, maybe I'm just so out of it at family events. I'm just too self-absorbed, but I'm sure it's happened to you, so that's a point of trauma for you, maybe.
That's where I'm not going to pay for therapy with you, because I'm a single kid. No family events.
Yeah. That's nice. Okay.
Yeah. Interesting.
Lucky you.
Interesting. So this was the tangent. I want to go back to what was my original question.
All right, sexy.
Which is, what is poetry to you?
Walao.
Because from doing this podcast and talking to people of, I guess, different occupations, professions, even those within the same space as me, they have different definitions of what their particular profession and what their craft means to them at that particular point in time. So I just want to know, what is poetry to you right now, and has it changed along the way?
As in poetry as a genre?
It's however you choose to interpret the question.
I think I've said this before, but poetry to me is a feeling first, and also sort of a thing that you experience, right? So when you read a really good poem, sometimes you can't really put your finger on why it's good, or why it stabs you in the gut, which is the feeling that I'm looking for when I'm reading poetry, because I read poetry for Singapore Unbound, and sometimes I have to reject people like my friends and my housemates. But the reason why some poems get accepted and some poems don't is because I have the sense, I want to feel stripped apart and seen, and maybe a little bit violated or recognized, or having that connection exist in the poem as an artifact, and as a reader sort of experiencing the poem for the first time or for the 100th time or whatever. I think it is good poetry, right? If you're talking about poetry in the pure and distilled form, like being able to reach that poetry feeling is a way to access a part of you and a feeling that you couldn't articulate before, whether or not that feeling is like disgust or like nausea or love or whatever. I think that is the value of poetry to me, right? To be able to say what is inarticulable.
Is it always something fleeting?
I don't think so. I think sometimes it sticks with you. Like, there's a really famous poem by Mary Oliver called Good Bones, and it resonates with a lot of people, and a lot of poems resonate with a lot of people, right? But, I mean, for better or worse. But it's not something like you can say like, oh my god, this poem is so relatable. It's like everybody experiences it, but it is when you read the poem and you feel like you are being talked to like personally by the poem. I think that is the beauty of it, you know? Like it's not generic. It's not like, oh yeah, today my butt crack was itchy, and then everyone's like, yeah, damn, my butt crack was itchy too, you know? Like sure, but like in a way that makes it feel new every time. I think that is like the hard part, right? Anyone can write a poem, fine, whatever. But being able to make that feeling arise in your audience.
So what in your opinion is the key ingredient to transform a mediocre or even a neutral piece of poem into a magnificent one? What is that bridge? Is it experience? Is it feeling? What is it?
I think you definitely can get better, and you do get better with practice, right? So like practicing writing something, it's like the potter thing, like you make 100 pots, they're all shitty, but at the end of it you're a better potter.
Oh,
right?
You waste a lot of clay.
I mean, you waste a lot of clay lah, but clay can recycle one, it's fine. Like words can recycle one, it's fine. You know, I mean that's also the beauty of like writing, right? It's just like whatever, word is cheap, talk is cheap. But I think that feeling, right, that sensitivity to how to write like a blade is some people have it. Like it's very easy for them.
What do you mean write like a blade?
It like, you know, when I said stabbed in the gut, that's what I mean, right? Like your poem is an entryway, or sort of like something so sharp and so potent that it just hits you in a place that you were just like, oh shit, you hit me in my vulnerable spot, and now I am laid out crying on the altar. Like, yay, true love. But you know, like being able to get to that requires vulnerability on your own part and a willingness to go back and sort of like sharpen the poem and like, you know, kind of like revise it until it reaches that state of both shimmering rawness and also something that's so finely crafted that, you know, like it's both, right? Like you want it to feel like a first kiss, but actually this kiss has been orchestrated and like built upon and, you know,
it's kind of creepy.
It is, right?
Yeah.
Why do you think poems are creepy? They are. Oh, socially awkward creeps. So, you know, that being able to, it's like any craft, right? Like how do you know if something looks good? Like you cannot say, oh, because this color looks good, or like, well, this whatever looks good. You can point to certain aspects of a print or a picture or a painting, but you can't say for sure, like, oh, you know, if you just replicate this and you put this and this and this together, like you'll make another one that's different, but kind of like creating exactly the same feeling, right? So that is, I think, for me, the poem, like the sensibility that requires that deftness and sensitivity to connection.
So I find when I read some of your poems and poetry, it conjures up really vivid images. So are you cognizant of those images when you are weaving together the poem, or what comes first? Like, is it the image or the concept, or is it you just start typing and you like certain things and you piece them together?
Sometimes it takes a while. So I think what you're asking is the process, right? Like, do you decide on the images first? And I think it's both. So like in the beginning, I would just write whatever, then I would try and describe something, you know, in a way that was new and yet accurate, because like obviously that's the goal of poetry. But I think when I went to this project, my mentor Divya Victor also introduced certain ways of creating that were different, right? Like for example, C.A. Conrad, the poet, also does this thing where they make up rituals to sort of like break through your inner censor, and you know, like you write after a ritual, and you know, maybe you're sitting in the bathtub or you're chewing on a piece of fruit, and then you listen to the fruit, and then you like write down what the fruit says to you with your eyes closed, and that kind of interruption in your cognitive process sort of gives you new material and new words to play with, I think. But mostly when I write a poem, it is about, I think, when I write a poem that I'm satisfied with, it's about latching onto a feeling and then sort of like feeling my way around the feeling, you know, with these phrases that are sometimes surprising and sometimes very vivid. But it's like making the abstract tangible. But I've also been called incomprehensible, so maybe don't listen to me. By more than one person.
Could you paint me a picture or even describe what you mean by trying to capture the intangible?
Let's say you were extremely fucked up about something that someone did to you, right? And but you don't want to talk about it in a way like, oh, today this man at the bus stop took a shit on my lap, right? But you want to sort of like grab hold of that feeling of guilt or disgust or whatever. So I think that is the abstract that I sort of like try and latch onto, and then, you know, you sort of bring that thread over to the writing, which tends to become like, oh, you know, whatever, then like the sort of like associations or the feeling of like whatever, chocolate drudgery in the rain or whatever, you know, like it's sort of like at some points it seems like a game, like word association, and at others it seems like I want to create something that's not on the nose. It's like it's elevated, right? You know when have you seen those horrible food videos where they try and like sort of do like chemical recreations of food? Like they'll blender a steak, and then they'll blend a steak into like a foam, right? And then you like sort of like inhale the foam, and that's
you have to send me these videos after the cat boy thing. Yeah, I've never seen those before. Yeah.
We obviously live on very different corners of the internet.
Evidently so, but is it because it's a weird combination of things or weird construction of things?
It is what is it called? Gastro something, but
gastronomy?
No, like it is a combination of chemistry and the experience of eating, right? So it's not even about the sensation of eating, like the visceral, or you're chewing on the gristle, you're sucking it down, you're swallowing it. But you know, it gets kind of like changed and in texture, in form, into this horrible like approximation of what it's like to eat a steak. And I think that sometimes when we get into the abstract, it is like that. So I think my aim is to go from the visceral to the abstract and back into something that is sensual and tactile and sort of like physical again, which is very hard to do on paper because it's such a cerebral medium, right? Like you can't enjoy it the way you would enjoy a piece of music. Like you can just play it in the background and just listen to the beat or whatever. And I envy that, right? I really envy like that musicians can sort of like have that access to people without even, it's more low effort rather than opening up a book and being like, oh, I don't fucking understand what this stupid poem is about, right? But I think that is the goal when I'm trying to write a poem, and I think that's why you feel like, you know, there's so much tactility, there's so many like meaty images and kind of like a little bit gross, coming out. I think that clusterfuck aesthetic is how I remain present in the poem's body.
I wish shops would carry the clusterfuck aesthetic. I think that's a very brilliant marketing term.
I love it so much, It's like, collage as well. I think that's why I love collage, because it is really like, it's so arresting and overwhelming.
I think it's interesting you bring up music. And okay, it's sort of comparatively music, visual arts and poetry and writing. I think with visual arts and music, there's a little more elements at play. You have different layers of, let's say for music, you have the beat, the melody, the writing, the subtext. You have a lot more ingredients really to play around with. But if we were to put the spotlight on writing, are you able to elaborate and explain what is that? Because to the layman, it's just words. But what are some of the elements that we do not see that goes into the construction of, let's say, your writing or your poems?
Well, the poets will be very angry that you say that there's not a lot of aspects. I think also because
to the layman.
Yeah, I know. Like, I think that's also why spoken word poetry is easier to consume, because it's like, you understand it's a performance. It's somebody speaking words to you for 3 minutes. Like, sometimes it rhymes and it's kind of like a poem. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a song. But I think there are these questions, right, when you sort of like study poetry, as to how do you use space, how do you use breath in a poem, how do you use sound, like musicality. So there is that oral aspect, not oral as in like with the mouth, but oral as in auditory, right? And the idea that the form follows the content, which is, I think, something that I personally try to do as much as I can. So if you look at the book, right, there are certain poems that take the shape of like the birth control tab, or I forgot like poems that come from photographs, for example, right? Like a lot of like found poetry where I go around Singapore and I take photos of stupid signs. But all of these things are ways in which you present your subject matter. Like if you choose to adopt the language of, say, a museum display placard, the wall text, like what is that saying to your audience, right? So even the form itself sort of like communicates, like, oh, I'm saying something about this form that is, like maybe you should think about that a little bit more. So I think I view all of these things, and you're right? Like poetry is not the most multimodular of art forms, but I think being able to play with that limited range, I guess, and expand the idea of how we can make maybe like a volume of poetry transcend those things is really interesting. Like my editor and mentor Divya Victor, she recently came out with a book called Curb, and it's about the South Asian, I guess, diasporic experience, as well as, like brutality in America. And her book is like an accordion, right? So you open it and it folds out, right? So it's in itself like the physical artifact of the book. It's also really gorgeous, and like you can, there are many ways to reimagine a book, right? So I think like that's very nice to play with as well. And of course, like I design like my book's cover, right? So I care about these things, but maybe other people don't care that much about it. So maybe I'm shallow, I don't know.
I think it's immediately appealing when I looked at it, especially the cover. It is arresting in a way that it was unexpected. I thought it was an encyclopedia at first of like the morbid curiosity kind, but when I looked into it, it's like, oh, okay, it's a poetry book, which is interesting because it's very unconventional.
Thank you. Those are my great grandfather's eyes, like on the cover.
I was wondering whose eyes. Okay, it's like a little bit disturbing.
Yeah, weird, right?
Little bit.
Yeah, it was so odd because like my father just sent it to us in a WhatsApp chat, and he was like, "Oh, this is like your great grandfather." Like,
he felt compelled to, probably someone was telling him to.
Yeah, probably, and it was so weird because like a cousin of his was doing up a family tree, and there were all these very problematic descriptions of our family, like, oh, your great grandmother was like raped by her husband, and therefore she bore 3 children. I was like, oh, that's not nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then like there was another line where it was like, oh, this guy married a beautiful Malay woman, and then full stop, and that was it. And like everybody else had names. I'm like, bitch, where's her name?
Oh my god. Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, Chinese families, they're like that.
Unfortunately.
They'll cut you off the family tree.
So in going back to the topic, you mentioned about your mentor. So I want to ask the question like, throughout your journey of writing, even up to publishing up to now, have you had any mentors?
I mean, I call her my mentor, but that's because she was sort of like not assigned, but I proposed that she work with me on this book, which was actually an undergraduate like sort of like research project. So NTU sort of made me make time for it.
Yep.
And forever after, I just kept calling her my mentor because I've learned so much from her, but not in the way that people usually have mentorships. I don't really know what that would entail in outside of school, right? Like in a context that was outside of school, because how do you just like walk up to someone and tell them, hey, mentor me? Is it like asking them out on a date? Like, hey, I have all these things at my disposal.
I think it's 2 levels down from date, but 1 level up from a coffee meeting.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Like, how do people network and say, hey, I want to, let's go out for a coffee?
You're asking the wrong person.
It's so weird. It's so weird.
Okay, but as a follow-up to that question, I'm just curious to know, why did you choose her? Or was it assigned by the school? But I just want to know what your thought process is when choosing someone like her to get feedback from for your work. Why her?
Oh, Divya was just an absolute treasure because she was, I think, wow, because I was in the school's creative writing and drama club at that time, and then they were like, quickly, let's get Divya. She's young and fresh and she hasn't been chewed up and spat out by the system yet. So that was the first impression I got from her. But you know, I just thought that she was like this young upstart prof who like maybe had a lot of energy and like was really idealistic. But the more I talked to her, I realized that, oh, okay, this woman actually knows her shit. Like it's refreshing and gratifying to talk to her in a way that I really did not come to expect from a lot of people that I met, you know. So I think it was weird because I was definitely like shopping around for professors at that point because you could choose, right? So I would go to like these professors' offices and then sit down and chat with them. And I very, very nearly went with this other guy who was interested in an academic project about linguistics and like queer language and blah, blah, blah. But I eventually went with her because it was like the question, like, if you really, really only had time for one of these things, what would you do? And I think the answer was clear, right? She kind of just sat me down and said, yeah, I'm totally on board with whatever you want and let's work together to like make this happen. And I think that amount of sort of like confidence that, you know, like we would just massage it into the thing that it was supposed to be was quite reassuring. So, I felt safe.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
From just working together with her to push out the final product.
Oh yeah. Divya has like a way of making her students feel very safe, like in any class that she does.
Would you be able to elaborate more as to why? What is this safe feeling? I
think so I took a creative class of hers in the last year that she was teaching at NTU, and I think I was quite struck by the emphasis on equal learning and equal sharing, even though we were all coming from different places in creative writing. But there was this very, I guess, palpable sense that she cared about you, not just as like a student, but also like as a human being. And she would say, okay, you know, like make sure it's like a class discussion is like having a bunch of buns on the plate, on the table. And if you have taken too many buns, maybe leave some buns for other people. And if you haven't taken any buns, please take a bun. So it was like, and then she would go back and, you know, one time she said the word blinded in class. And then she went back, she was like, occluded, like, yeah, then, you know, it's like that commitment to not using ableist language, to making sure that people of all marginalizations feel safe and seen, which I find is super difficult to do when you're teaching, because like, how do you think about that and teach at the same time?
There is a lot of things to
Exactly.
be aware of. Yes.
Unless you really do just make it a part of your everyday life, your person. So I respect that a lot, you know?
Interesting. I'm curious to know what, in your opinion, is wholly unique to the medium of writing.
I'm very lazy, so
wonderful. Good to know.
So I love writing because there's not a lot of prep time. Like, you don't.
It sounds like there is a lot of prep time.
I mean, yeah, research is one thing, I guess, but the actual act of writing, like for example, if you're a painter or you're a potter, you need to go and get your clay, your tools. You need to go to the studio. You need to whatever. Writing you can do anywhere. You know, like when the mood strikes you, you can just even write in your head, and it doesn't, like, I guess it doesn't change the quality of your work. It's there, right? It's sort of like a mediumless, as close as you can get to a mediumless medium without it being like a folk ditty that people passed down through oral tradition, you know? And I think that because it is so portable and because it is so easy for people to transmit writing, I think there is a power in that, right? Like, how do you make sure something sort of like, it's pretty much the short, like the simplest way to transmit an idea, which I love because I like communicating. I think all artists do, right? That's why they're artists in a way.
Whether they're conscious or not conscious of it, I think they are, yeah.
Yeah. And that connection, right? So like, for example, memes, like not visual memes, but just, you know, like catchphrases or whatever. Like as a linguist, that's fascinating to me because when you write a phrase, a stupid nonsense phrase, like fertile and breedable, you don't expect that everyone picks up on it and like just runs with it, but sometimes they do. And I think like that is kind of a marker of how quickly a modern language sort of like evolves and changes. But of course, like that was happening in the past as well.
But it is also accentuated a lot by technology these days.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So maybe the question is like, how does writing, like now, like how has it evolved as an art form, right? And I mean, I don't think that I would have written half the things that I have written without my phone or my laptop or whatever, because it's so much faster. And you know, to have to transfer your longhand onto the computer, it's just an undertaking in itself, you know. Yeah. And yeah, I just think that when you are a writer, there's a sense that your words, as long as language still exists, they'll be produced just like that. You know, it's so easy. And obviously it's dangerous because then you get like quoted out of context in Parliament, right?
Was oddly specific. So how do you imagine it changing in the future? I asked this question because when I asked a music producer this question, so he was highlighting how in recent years Spotify came to popularity, and with that there is the algorithm, the almighty algorithm, and how it favors tracks that has a certain structure. Structure meaning, let's say for the intro, it's not too long, it's not too short, and it kind of outcasts a lot of songs where traditionally there might be a longer intro, there might be a longer build-up. So I'm just curious to know from your perspective, how do you see the form of writing or the meaning of writing changing within the next 2 to even 5 years as the technology keeps up? I think there was a recent article about how the generative AI has gotten so good that it can write an article that some people might not even know that it's written by an AI.
Yeah. I mean, if you're talking about how do you make your work popular on with the help of the algorithm, or, you know, in spite of the algorithm, then I feel like that's not something I'm very good at, I think. Like, I love technology and I love social media, but I also hate when people sort of like produce things solely for social media. I think that, whatever, right? The rise of Insta poetry and
Insta poetry.
Yeah. So, I thought you were laughing just now because you were thinking about that. So, like Langleaf or Rupi Kaur.
I have heard of Rupi Kaur.
Yeah. So, I mean, these women basically sort of like have a brand of Insta poetry that is quite very popular, actually. Like, I think Rupi Kaur is the most maybe most read poet in history. I think
the book
apart from Homer.
I think it's the book with the black cover and the white text.
Yeah. Milk and Honey. But that's the thing, like, she doesn't need to have a book because so many people read her poems every single day, and there is a certain power in that, I think. So yeah, definitely, right? Like in any kind of platform, there will be people who write it specifically for that platform. And I think it sort of leaves behind a lot of people who don't want to play the social media game. I see a lot of writers like bemoaning that they have to kind of like create content for their social media like handles or whatever. And that's cool and all, but like I think it should be normalized that we don't feel obliged to perform. It's like that Missy Elliott lyric, like, none of you are writing songs too concerned with fashion, that.
That was a very obscure reference. What song is that?
I don't remember. But I always think about that when I like post a cute selfie. I'm like, I'm not writing. I'm too obsessed with fashion.
How do you grapple with social media?
Oh, I just shitpost. Like,
oh, fantastic.
I think that it takes the pressure off. Like, I see people with like really nice social media, like curated social media feeds, and I just think it's so tiring. I like being messy. I like the feeling that I can post something extremely weird and awful, and people will be like, yeah, that's just Marylyn. It's okay. Like, you give yourself permission.
Yep.
And, to not be whatever. Because I don't think I could do that anyway. I don't think I could present something polished and something uniformly hot, right? Like, for example, like a lot of influencers are just like uniformly hot all the time.
Uniformly hot. I've never heard that description before.
I mean, they are genuinely, I'm sure they are genuinely hot in real life as well, right? But it's every single picture. It's like, wow, you're gorgeous, you're gorgeous, you're gorgeous. And like, I think that, I mean, first of all, I don't think I can do that because like, I don't have the looks for it. But at the same time, it's also like, why doesn't it get boring, like, don't you want to fuck it up a little bit sometimes? But maybe that's not the platform for it. I don't know, who knows, right? And I think that's also the reason why I'm not very good at social media, even though I enjoy it.
Do you think the idea of social media and the fact that everyone now has a brand, or it really is a brand and has to perform to a certain degree, it influences the type of the art they want to create?
I think there's a lot of pressure to define that brand, right? And then the easier it is for the publisher or the market to sort of like categorize you, then the easier it is to say, okay, if you liked this, maybe you'll like this, right? But I think also then that it becomes like there's a certain power in being uncategorizable, which is why I kind of struggle with being like, oh yeah, I'm a writer. Yeah. So if I kind of worry that, if I just call myself a writer the whole time, but I'm not actually writing, I'm not posting about writing, then it's not not truthful in a certain way.
But this goes back to the initial idea about identity. Like, like, what does it mean to identify as a writer? Is it like you're writing X amount per week, per day?
I wish. Can you imagine?
That would be peak productivity.
Yeah.
So, I actually can imagine for your next book, like, you write about memes. Like, I don't know why, but I can picture you doing that. Like, you exploring the idea.
It'll be fun, right?
I don't know, but I think from my perspective, when I think about what you've done, and I look at some of the imagery you've conjured. I think the idea of doing memes wouldn't be too far of a deviation from your brand.
Yeah, I guess so. Whatever that brand is.
Whatever that brand is. I'm curious to know, would you ever, or have you ever written in a different language before? And if so, what is that different from writing in English?
I have, but it's very bad because I'm quite aggressively monolingual.
Aggressively mono. Okay.
Yeah, because I just don't think I like to do things that I'm good at and I think are worth people's time. And if I try to write in, say, Mandarin, a language that I am notoriously terrible in, it's like, who's going to read this and what for? You know, like, how is it going to contribute to their life in any way? But I think that, okay, so I've done things like translated maybe like songs from Mandarin into English and, you know, like vice versa or whatever. But in my personal life, not like for
that was a profession. Okay.
No.
I was like, wow.
Can you imagine? Wow.
I can't imagine.
Like, you know, the amount that translators get paid is amazing. Anyway, yeah, but it's always been sort of weirdly intimate, like, because I think Mandarin for a lot of people, and especially for a lot of like Chinese Singaporeans, holds a lot of trauma in like language learning because they were forced to learn it when they don't speak it at home, right? Yep. And for me to kind of reclaim that and say, oh, now it's a language of love, or it's a language where I'm trying to express affection to somebody else, is quite daunting and quite it's quite a vulnerable process, I think.
I've heard and I've been told that the Chinese language is actually quite beautiful.
Oh, do you not speak Chinese?
I can understand it.
Okay.
I can speak it when I need to. I speak it exceptionally well when I'm ordering food because you have to know that.
Oh, is it not just no,
not at all. Like, it's down to the specific, but it's not going back to the idea of being recluse. It's just you don't meet people and you don't speak Chinese. Yeah. But it's kind of one of those things where you learn growing up in Singapore and you just park it as like a folder in your back of your head. And let's say when you're ordering food, you know what the food is.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I think my partner's like Mandarin is better than mine in some aspects. Like, it's kind of amazing. Like, that aunties will be talking shit about her and then she'll be like, 我知道你们讲什么.
Oh shit.
Sorry, that meant like, yeah, I know what you guys are talking about. Then they'll be like, a brown person speaking Mandarin.
It shouldn't be that much of a shock in 2021.
It should not. Yeah. I mean, look at Pretty Please, right? Like, her Mandarin is excellent, but it still is for a lot of racist Singaporeans. And I just feel like I wish I was better at Mandarin because you know, it's always nice to have something like that in your arsenal. You can like, it comes in handy, but it's not something that I found myself needing to use a lot. That being said though, it's also kind of privileged to say like, oh, I don't need this language because like my English is so excellent. You know, a lot of people don't have access to that either. But yeah, it's a complicated kind of like relationship. I've often wished that I could read Chinese because there's a lot of like extremely kinky like Mandarin fan fiction out there that I want to like access.
But it's in
can't.
Chinese.
Yeah.
It's like hieroglyphs, man. Oh my god. Yeah, so talking conversational Chinese or Mandarin is fine.
Yeah.
But I think reading Chinese is a different ballgame. Yeah.
It's so tiring. I'll get through 3 lines. I'm like, I can't do this. I need to get off. Like, there's not doing anything.
But it seems like writing poems for the next book in Chinese seems like the type of uphill challenge that you will take on.
It sounds interesting. Now, yeah, come to think about it. But I don't know. It just seems like, oh, another bilingual poet, you know, trying to be bilingual, but actually cannot make it.
Have you ever thought about learning a different language apart from Chinese? Then?
Yeah, I mean, I did do a couple of semesters of Spanish when I was in Polytechnic, but that did not go well. I mean, it did not go well. It was more like nobody wanted to continue. And I also did sign language, which was really fun. I really enjoyed sign language actually, because it's, I mean, you obviously know, right? Like,
I know of sign language.
Yeah, you know. Okay, fine. I mean, you've seen people signing, right?
So the interesting part is, before these past couple of months, I would say no, but I've been recently watching Twitch, and I've been recently watching this game on Twitch called VR Chat. Okay. So it's virtual reality chat. So it's people putting on a virtual headset and they go into the space and they converse and they talk. And I've seen a lot of sign languages in that because there are some people there that might be too afraid to speak. They might not be willing to speak and they do sign language. Right. And some of them, they're not able to speak as well. Yeah. So they do a lot of sign language. So it's like, this is interesting. Not the place I would imagine looking at sign language, but very interesting.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, and I realized that it's really good for, like crowded spaces when you can't hear each other and like you're across the room and then you just sign to the person. Oh, it's great. And then all of your friends are like, what are you saying? What are you saying about us? Just like, no, I just want to go to the bathroom. Yeah. But that in itself, it's more physical than, like any other verbal language. So I find that doing signing it's not even like a language in the way that we think about language as composed of words, but more like another means of communication, I think.
So that's a brilliant way to put it, actually.
Yeah, but I'm just an amateur at sign language, so I don't know the syntax or the rules of sign language. And sometimes when I sign, it's always like, oh, I don't know the sign for this word, so I'm just gonna spell it out like a toddler. And then it's quite fun to feel like, oh, you're bad at something, but you're doing your best to connect with somebody else, right? And because you are signing, it's I think it's more intimate sometimes because I can speak to you without looking at you, right? I can just like look over there, and you've obviously noticed I'm not very good at eye contact because like it interrupts my train of thought. But when you sign, you have to look at the person, right? There's no way you're gonna look at the wall and sign, and you have to make sure that they are looking at you,
and
right?
they understand and they look at what you're signing.
Yes. And sometimes they're like, okay, like do it again, like I didn't catch that, right? So it's I think it forces you to be more present than you would in like a verbal conversation.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I don't know, like that's also interesting to think about, like what is like language and how do we expand the boundaries of that.
I mean, it's been said in the English language, we all know it's terribly shitty.
Oh,
it's terrible.
It's just badly constructed.
It is not enough.
Yeah. And I mean, I think you can say the same for all languages, and that has to do with like culture as well, right? Like there are little blind spots in every language that we just don't get to use. But English is just
the lowest tier.
kind of a magnificent beast, actually, right?
I think when I first found out that there were missing words in the English language that is more represented, say in, let's say, Japanese, Chinese, German, Swedish language, I think it's like, whoa, there's missing words. It's like, it's like words that you can't they basically fill the gaps, really.
Yeah. And I think like listening to anybody code switching between two languages, you kind of I like when people speak like Mandarin and then English and then Mandarin again, because sometimes they'll know like exactly what the concept is in Mandarin, but like, so they'll say it in Mandarin, then you kind of want to translate it, but you can't because the disdain or the amount of like complexity that is inherent in those words is kind of lost, right? If you just say, oh, like I can't think of an example right now, but you know what I mean.
I believe you just described Singlish.
Yeah, Singlish is also like super beautiful and very evocative.
It's very practical.
Very economic language, I think. Yeah.
In moving on, and I guess in taking the conversation to a close, I'm just curious to know, are there any other forms of mediums of creativity that you are drawn to? I ask this question because in addition to your poetry, I believe the visuals that you use, be in the form of video or like images, are particularly strong as well. So I'm just curious to know, like, are there any forms like films, audiobooks, painting, like all these other things, like are you drawn to anyone in particular?
In particular, not I'm kind of a slut, so like I just love.
So a snob and a slut.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay.
A snut. I love sort of dabbling in new mediums. I really like the process of video editing because
Wait, what?
Yeah, I like it. I know it's very tedious, but I love it.
I've never heard anybody say they really like the process of video editing. It's mostly the filming, the conceptualizing, but not the video editing.
But it's like, okay, when you film something and then when you get to edit it, you're like, oh, look at all these like shitty pieces of footage. Now I'm going to put them together to make them like extremely weird and less shitty, you know? And I think being able to see the process, and sometimes I'll be, because I've done amateur video projects, right? And then sometimes I'll just be laughing to myself as like I edit. I'm just like, oh my god, this is gonna be so funny. Like when I put it together, and then like you make an executive decision that it's just like, this is gonna be hilarious when you watch it. And I think I just like art forms that allow you to do that, allow a certain level of improvisation, of experimentation, like collage as well. You never know, like, you know, like what images work well together until you juxtapose them, and then you're like, oh, this is like kind of striking, you know, in its own way.
So the surprise of how, or the confluence of different things coming together is quite genuine as well. Yeah,
exactly, right? I mean, I'm sure you do that sometimes when you're creating something visual, and then you're like, quite nice,
I think yes and no. It depends on what kind of space or really hate space that I'm creating from. It depends on how vivid the imagery is. Like, let's say if you have a very vivid imagery, then you're kind of just following the roadmap, or you're being guided by something that you can't see.
Yeah.
But if it's more like the being just drops you in a point in time and you're just figuring it out, I think that's particularly beautiful as well, because if everything's so predictable, if you're able to predict what you're going to create, I don't think you'll be in the arts anymore.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of boring.
Yeah. Yeah, so I was wondering, because like some people, they kind of plan out everything beforehand, right? And then they're like, okay, it's going to look exactly like this. And then they do it and it does look exactly like it. And I'm just like, how did you do that? You know? Like, I mean, I can't because I'm a very disorganized person, but good to know that you don't do it either.
My room would suggest otherwise.
I see. Yeah.
So in closing, I have two more questions. Okay. I'm curious to know, like, are there any poems or writings or even books that you would like to experience again for the first time?
Wow. Films and books. I guess I really enjoy like films that I find fascinating in the twist. Like you kind of, but then again, like a lot of my favorite films have very like high rewatchability value, right? So like
Toy Story?
No.
Okay.
I mean, like Hercules, but I don't know if you've watched Visitor Q. So that's my favorite movie, and it opens with the line, "Have you ever done it with your dad?" And then it like starts from there. Anyway, it's about this dysfunctional family made less dysfunctional by a violent visitor called Visitor Q, and blah blah blah. So a lot of these films, right, I watch because they are just so kind of a little bit insane and weird, but comforting in their weirdness at the same time. So maybe I would like to rewatch them when I'm not expecting it, but I'm not the kind of person who's like, oh, it's a spoiler, then like my enjoyment of the thing is like lessened because of it. I think that's kind of cheapening, like, so the whole value of your media is based on this one like twist, For books, I think things like Kurt Vonnegut's Cat's Cradle or Maggie Nelson's The Argonauts. These are books that kind of like amazed and blew my mind when I first read them. And I think like maybe experiencing them again as the person I am now would
be different. I'm not sure if they would be less enjoyable. I like highly suspect so, right? But it would be interesting.
But you could
to say
glean
the
something
least.
that you might not have noticed before.
Yeah, or you could be like, actually, this was kind of an annoying writer.
That is a particularly insightful insight as well.
I guess so.
What about poems?
Poems.
Or just writings in general? Not in a book format, but just writings. Yeah.
I kind of wish that I felt the same way that I did when I was sort of like discovering the writings of Alfian for the first time, you know, because that was kind of the first time that I felt like I could recognize the person that I was in the society that I was, and the anger and the sort of like this feeling like you were in a country or you were in a system that didn't really care for you, right? So a lot of that sort of like adolescent anger is there, and feeling seen like that is something that's super valuable and rare, I think, to me. Maybe not those books in particular for the first time, but that feeling. Like I'm always trying to chase that feeling, you know?
Doesn't that feeling taper off once you get past a certain age?
It should, right? Like, but I don't know. I think maybe good poetry makes you feel seen at all ages. Or at least that's what I like to believe. You know? I don't know.
So my last question for this podcast is, what is your craft? Craft meaning your writing and your poetry.
Witchcraft.
Or witchcraft. What has it taught you about yourself?
I think it's taught me that I'm actually quite I care. I didn't think that I would care as much as I did, right? So I'm more of a perfectionist than I thought. And I thought that, you know, maybe I don't have an ego, or I don't have a certain expectation of myself or ambition, right? But I think that it's shown me that you do have standards. It's just very different from like your parents' standards, or, you know, like your teacher standards. And I think that discovering that QC, right, the like marker of quality for yourself and like the baby factory that you are, is totally different. It's not different. It's an invaluable experience in marking out what belongs to you and what is valuable to you.
It sounds wholly unique to you, really.
Yeah. Full of holes and unique.
Like cheese.
Yes.
What is your relationship like with perfection?
I kind of spit on it, but at the same time I want to achieve it, you know? It's like I don't want to be perfect in the way that people envision perfection, but I want to be perfect to myself. You know? It's a very self-absorbed thing, I think.
That's what we humans can strive for. I mean, being self-absorbed seems like the most humanist of traits.
I guess. Yeah, but I think I'm always struggling with that. Like, how do you be authentic to yourself and yet not be self-absorbed? Or self-indulgent?
I don't think the two are relatable or even talking about the same things. I think both can exist on itself, because I think it belongs to like a healthy self-image, or even like a healthy image, not just self-image, like a healthy idea of yourself.
Yeah.
Like I personally feel that it's important to know your strengths and your weaknesses, really. Like with that, you know what you can do. You know to the best of your ability what you're about. And with that, you can look to try certain things. You can dabble. You can know what to move towards. I feel that it is in the unknowing that is a bit how would I say it? The uncertainty could be unsettling.
Yeah, but also kind of exciting, right? It's like, oh, I want to find out something ugly that I didn't about myself before.
I have to wait for you to introduce me to the ugly side. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, because I've always believed I guess it's always a balance between like order and chaos, like the certainty and uncertainty. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think one can live in complete uncertainty. I think that is hell. I mean, complete uncertainty. But living in a society, there are certain things that are quite structured. There are certain things, certainty to that. And I think it is also quite important to take comfort in those things.
Yeah, I think maybe the word I'm looking for is like self-awareness. Like, you know yourself, but you also know that there are certain pockets of potential that you haven't explored yet, right? And then like when you do something and you know you're bad at it, but you still do it, it's very liberating as well.
Oh
Yeah. It's just painful when like people don't know that they're bad at it, but they continue to do it. Then you're like,
I think it depends on what is the word for it? The ultimate goal. I guess if you're doing something that is you can be bad at it, but I guess everybody has to start somewhere. And ultimately if it's just for themselves, and I think it's interesting also.
Yeah, I think it's very important to be intentional with your mediocrity, or like, the shit that you are doing purely for pleasure, which I find isn't done a lot, or we don't have a lot of space for that in Singapore, because everybody's like, well, if you're not good at it, then why are you doing it? Like, don't waste your time.
That is one of the unfortunate realities, that when we conflate or when we try to push, I guess, the idea of art or creating into having to earn money or having to let's say create a product at the end of the day, I feel that is ultimately quite detrimental.
Yeah.
To a certain degree, like if like my personal thoughts are that if you're able to create wholly for yourself, technically, if you're smart about it, I think the money and the business side should come after, but ultimately it should be the creator's intent on what to create.
Yeah. But it's also kind of upsetting because like I know a lot of creatives who are very good creatives but very terrible business people.
I mean, it's diametrically opposed attributes, really.
Yeah. So it's painful, like I wish that we could all kind of live in a society where like, oh, it's the village artist's turn to just make beautiful things and we'll just feed them after that.
Do you feel the need? Okay, I'm just curious for this. Do you feel the need that these days for creatives, there is a need for them to be business persons as well? There's a need for them to cover that side that perhaps in the past someone else could do it, but right now because social media and everything, you are like a brand. You have to know the whole business part. You have to negotiate with people. You have to even talk to people and stuff like that.
Yeah, gig economy, baby. I think that it's not it. Yeah, definitely. Like the pressure is on to be like, okay, I'm the person who can do everything for myself. I can pull myself up by my own bootstraps and whatever, like achieve success all by myself, which is kind of nice because a lot of the processes that used to be closed off to people, like self-publishing or even just like drop shipping a new like printed notebook or whatever, it's all become so accessible to us, for better or worse. But I think the problem with that is when you become sort of like you don't know how to resource help for yourself. You can't really sort of like organize in a way that is useful to both you and other people, because I think sometimes people forget that art is not just about your individual success as an artist as well. It's also about creating space, and that's what makes it different from corporations or like for-profit businesses. I think making like business from art has been going on forever. I mean, look at the NFTs, right? Like money laundering and art, they go hand in hand. So I don't think it's a new idea. I just feel like people get sucked into that trap because they see everyone doing it and then they feel like, oh, well, that's what success means now.
So in closing, what does success mean to you right now?
Wow, my friend Winnie just asked me about this. I think that success is about being able to do the things you want to do in the time that you want to do them, right? Whether or not that means being able to have enough leisure time to do the things that really do fulfill you, or being able to have the platform that you want to do the things on the scale that you want to do them. And I think being able to sustain yourself based solely on creating or producing the things that you actually do want to produce is sort of like the pipe dream for, I think, any creative, right? Like you don't want to have to hustle just to be able to support your art habit.
Definitely.
So I think that's the goal, manifesting it.
Witchcraft.
Yeah.
Okay. In closing, where can people find your work? Where are you available online? Where can people buy your books and stuff like that? Everything. Plug yourself. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm usually on Instagram at marylyn.orofficial. That's ORIFICIAL, orofficial. Oh, sorry, if you don't know how to spell my name, look at the podcast.
Definitely.
But the book is sold by Ethos. You can just search Gaze Back, not gays as in homosexuals, but GAZE, Gaze Back, Ethos Books, and you'll find it. And you can follow me on Twitter at Grinchfucker. I'm supposed to get a website up, but I have not. But if you Google me, you'll probably find me anyway.
And what do one have to search to find the mythical cat boys you were talking about? Just curious.
Oh my God.
On TikTok.
Just go and like look at the hashtag catboy. It's
okay, hashtag
all
catboy.
there, baby. If that's your kink.
All right. Thank you, Marylyn. This has been a fantastic time and a fantastic conversation.
Thanks so much, Kevin. It was such a pleasure.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed the episode and feel inspired. If you enjoyed what you heard thus far, do give us a follow on Instagram. And don't forget to share and subscribe. Stay tuned for the next episode.